No man dared to marry the infertile black woman until a scarred Hell's Angel leader did something no one in town could believe. In a small southern town where gossip spreads faster than grace, a lonely nurse lives under cruel whispers. Barren, forgotten, unworthy. Then, one stormy night, she drags a bleeding biker from the wreckage of his crash, and everything changes. He's covered in tattoos of Bible verses, haunted by a violent past, and hiding a secret that could destroy them both. When he shows up at the church picnic and declares before everyone, "If no man here's man enough to marry her, I will," the town gasps. But love this bold doesn't come without a price. Soon, she'll face her ex-husband's revenge, the church's judgment, and the law itself knocking on her door. Can grace survive scandal? And when faith and reputation collide, will mercy be enough to save them both? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Thunder crackled across the darkening sky as Zoe Ellison made her way through the familiar churchyard of First Baptist Church. The grass, still damp from yesterday's rain, squished softly beneath her sensible shoes. She kept her head high, though her heart felt heavy in her chest. The whispers followed her like autumn leaves in the wind. "That's the barren one," someone murmured, not quite soft enough to miss. Zoe's fingers tightened around her well-worn Bible, its leather cover smooth from years of faithful holding. She could feel the stairs boring into her back as she climbed the white-painted church steps. At 39 years old, she had grown used to the weight of those looks, but they still stung like tiny paper cuts to her soul. The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across the wooden pews. Zoe slipped into her usual spot, 5th row from the back, right side. Close enough to feel part of the congregation, far enough to avoid direct attention. The familiar scent of lemon polish and old hymnals wrapped around her like a comfortable blanket. As the service began, Zoe's mind wandered to that terrible day 8 years ago when the doctor had delivered the news that changed everything. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ellison, but you won't be able to carry a child to term." The words had fallen like stones into the quiet hospital room. Marcus, her husband then, had squeezed her hand so tight it hurt. But that was the last time he'd held her hand at all. The choir's voices soared toward the rafters, singing about God's endless love. Zoe's lips moved along with the familiar words, but her throat felt too tight to actually sing. She watched young mothers bouncing babies on their knees, toddlers squirming in their Sunday best, and felt that familiar ache deep in her chest. When service ended, Zoe waited for most of the congregation to file, out before standing. She had learned this dance years ago, how to smile and nod, how to keep moving without appearing to rush, how to dodge the well-meaning questions about whether she'd considered adoption or had prayed hard enough. Outside, the air felt thick with approaching rain. Dark clouds gathered overhead like a congregation of their own. Zoe walked quickly to her car, an aging blue sedan that had seen better days but still ran faithfully. As she drove home, fat raindrops began to splatter against her windshield. Her house sat at the end of a quiet country road, a small white craftsman with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. The flower beds, carefully tended with the same gentle attention she gave her patients at the hospital, burst with late summer blooms, despite the threatening weather. Inside, the silence wrapped around her like a heavy shawl. Zoe moved through her evening routine with practiced grace, changing out of her church clothes, warming up leftover chicken soup, setting a single place at the kitchen table. The house creaked and settled around her, its empty rooms echoing with the memory of dreams that never came true. Thunder rumbled outside as Zoe sat down at her dinner table. The solid oak surface gleamed in the soft kitchen light. A wedding gift from her parents, meant to host family gatherings and holiday meals. Now it held just her bowl of soup and a glass of water. "Dear Lord," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "thank you for this food and for your endless blessings." Her words trembled slightly as she continued, "Thank you for giving me strength when I feel weak and purpose when I feel lost." A particularly loud crack of thunder made her jump, and outside, the rain began to fall in earnest. It drummed against the roof and windows, nature's own percussion to accompany her solitary meal. Zoe stirred her soup slowly, watching the vegetables swirl in the broth. The house felt especially empty on nights like this, when the weather kept everyone indoors and the world seemed to shrink to the size of her kitchen. The tick of the wall clock marked each passing moment, steady and relentless like a heartbeat. Another rumble of thunder shook the windows, and Zoe found herself remembering how Marcus used to love storms. He would stand on the porch, watching the lightning split the sky, telling her how it reminded him of God's power. Now she wondered if he still watched storms with the same wonder, wherever he was with his new family. The soup grew cold as Zoe sat there, lost in thought. She could hear Mrs. Patterson from church this morning, talking to her friend after the service. Poor thing, living all alone in that big house, no children to fill it with laughter, no husband to share it with. It's not natural for a woman her age. Zoe's spoon clinked against the bowl as she set it down. "Lord," she whispered again, her voice catching slightly, "I know you have a plan for me, even when I can't see it, clearly. Help me to be strong enough to follow your path." The rain continued to fall outside, heavy and steady now. Zoe gathered her dishes and walked to the sink, her footsteps echoing in the empty kitchen. As she washed her single bowl and spoon, she hummed softly to herself, an old hymn about finding peace in troubled waters. Through the kitchen window, she could see her flower garden being pelted by the rain. The sturdy zinnias and black-eyed Susans bent under the weight of the water, but didn't break. They would straighten up again when the storm passed, just as they always did. Just as she always did. Zoe dried her hands on a kitchen towel and looked around her quiet home. The walls were decorated with carefully chosen artwork, scenes of peaceful gardens and biblical verses written in flowing script. Everything was neat, organized, peaceful. Some might say too peaceful. Another crack of thunder shook the house, and the rain seemed to fall even harder. Zoe moved to her living room and settled into her favorite armchair, picking up her Bible from the side table. The leather was soft and warm under her fingers as she opened it to the Book of Psalms, seeking comfort in the familiar words. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, Zoe sat quietly in her solitude, finding strength in her faith even as loneliness pressed in around her like the gathering darkness. She was used to being alone, had learned to find peace in the quiet moments. But on nights like this, the silence seemed to have a weight all its own. The clock on the mantel chimed 8 o'clock, its gentle tones almost lost in the sound of the rain. Zoe looked up from her Bible, taking in the empty room around her. The house had seemed so full of possibility when she and Marcus first bought it. They had planned to fill it with children's laughter, with family gatherings, with all the noise and chaos of a happy home. Now it held only her prayers and memories, and the steady drumbeat of rain on the roof. But still, she gave thanks for what she had: her health, her work helping others, and most of all, her faith that God had a purpose for everything, even if she couldn't see it yet. The storm continued its symphony outside as night settled fully over Willow Creek. In her quiet home, Zoe Ellison sat alone with her thoughts and her prayers, while the rain washed the world clean outside her windows, preparing it for whatever tomorrow might bring. The clock showed 11:45 when Zoe pulled on her raincoat and headed out into the stormy night. Her double shift at Willow Creek General had left her exhausted, but someone had to cover for Sarah's maternity leave. The irony wasn't lost on her. The rain hammered against her truck's windshield as she navigated the dark country roads. Her headlights carved yellow tunnels through the darkness, catching the curtains of water that fell in sheets. The wipers squeaked back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the downpour. "Just 15 more minutes," she whispered to herself, gripping the steering wheel tighter as thunder boomed overhead. The old truck swayed slightly in the gusting wind, and she slowed down, squinting to make out the familiar curves of Route 27. Lightning flashed, illuminating the countryside in stark white for a split second. That's when she saw it. Twisted metal glinting in her headlights, scattered across the shoulder of the road. Zoe's heart jumped into her throat as she hit the brakes, the truck's tires sliding slightly on the wet asphalt before coming to a stop. "Dear Lord," she breathed, reaching for her phone and emergency flashlight. She threw open the door and stepped out into the deluge. The rain immediately soaked through her coat as she hurried toward the wreckage, her flashlight beam dancing across scattered pieces of chrome and broken glass. The motorcycle lay on its side, its front wheel bent at an impossible angle. And there, a few feet away, she spotted a dark shape that made her blood run cold. A body, face down in the mud. Zoe ran to the fallen rider, her nursing training kicking in as she dropped to her knees beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" She pressed her fingers to his neck, relief flooding through her when she found a pulse, weak but steady. With careful movements, she turned him onto his back. He was a large man, his leather jacket soaked through with rain, and what she feared was blood. His face was pale beneath the mud and scrapes, but she could see he was breathing. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his features. Despite the circumstances, she couldn't help but notice he was handsome in a rugged way, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and a strong jaw covered in stubble. "Sir," she tried again, but he remained unconscious. The nearest hospital was 45 minutes away in this weather, and the local clinic was closed. Her house was less than 10 minutes down the road. Zoe made her decision quickly. "Lord, give me strength," she prayed, then began the difficult task of moving him. It took all her strength, but she managed to half drag, half carry him to her truck. His wet leather jacket squeaked against the seat as she pushed and pulled until he was inside. The drive home was tense, her eyes darting between the road and her unconscious passenger. Every few minutes, she reached over to check his breathing, whispering prayers of thanks each time she felt the steady rise and fall of his chest. When they finally reached her house, the porch light she'd left on cut through the darkness like a beacon. Getting him inside was even harder than getting him into the truck, but somehow she managed, leaving a trail of muddy water across her clean floor. The power was out, not unusual during storms like this, but Zoe knew where every oil lamp was stored. Soon, warm golden light filled her living room, where she'd managed to lay him on her couch. His boots and jacket were caked with mud, but she couldn't worry about her furniture now. As she cut away his sodden t-shirt to check for injuries, she gasped. In the flickering lamplight, she could see tattoos covering his chest and arms, but not the kind she expected. Bible verses flowed across his skin in elegant script, mixed with religious symbols and crosses. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," she read softly, recognizing Psalm 23 among the verses. Her fingers traced the words gently as she cleaned his wounds, mostly cuts and bruises, with one particularly nasty gash on his forearm that needed stitches. Thank goodness she kept a well-stocked medical kit at home. As she worked, Her professional mask slipped slightly. Who was this man? A biker with biblical tattoos found in the middle of nowhere on a stormy night? Hours passed as she tended to him, cleaning away mud and blood, stitching what needed stitching, checking for signs of concussion or internal injuries. The storm gradually began to die down, and the first hints of pre-dawn light were starting to creep into the sky when she heard him stir. A soft groan escaped his lips as his eyes fluttered open. They were startlingly blue, even in the dim light, and they fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Angel?" he murmured, his voice rough and confused. Zoe pulled back slightly, suddenly very aware that she had a strange man on her couch, that she was alone, and that no one knew he was here. Should she call Sheriff Harris? But what would the sheriff think, finding her alone with an unconscious biker in the middle of the night? The man's blue eyes held hers, and despite her uncertainty, she saw no threat in them, only pain and confusion. Still, her hand moved toward her phone as she sent up another silent prayer for guidance. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through Zoe's curtains, casting warm patterns across her living room floor. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a fresh, rain-washed world. She'd dozed fitfully in her armchair, keeping watch over her unexpected guest through the night. A movement from the couch caught her attention. Cole was stirring, his eyes opening more fully this time, awareness returning to his features. He tried to push himself up, then winced. "Easy there," Zoe said softly, moving to his side. "You took quite a fall last night." His blue eyes focused on her, clearer now than during his brief moment of consciousness earlier. "Water?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Of course." She hurried to fetch a glass, supporting his head as he drank. "Small sips, that's it." When he finished, he lay back, taking in his surroundings. "You're home?" he asked. "Yes. I found you on County Road 9 last night. Your motorcycle—" She hesitated. "Probably looks about as good as I feel," he said with a slight grimace that might have been attempting to be a smile. "I'm Cole Maddox." The name struck a chord of recognition. Zoe had heard whispers about the Maddox family, about the motorcycle club that had once been the source of so much trouble in the county. But the man before her, with his quiet voice and careful movements, seemed at odds with those stories. "I'm Zoe Ellison," she replied. "I'm a nurse at Mercy General. Are you hungry? You should try to eat something." "That'd be kind of you, ma'am." In her kitchen, Zoe whipped up a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee. Her mind wandered to the scripture she'd seen tattooed on his skin, to the gentleness in his voice that contradicted everything she'd heard about the Maddox clan. When she returned with the food, Cole had managed to sit up, though he was still pale. "Thank you," he said, accepting the plate. "Not just for breakfast, for everything. Most folks around here wouldn't have stopped." "I couldn't leave anyone hurt on the side of the road," Zoe said, settling into her chair with her own plate. They ate in comfortable silence for a few moments before Cole spoke again. "You're wondering about the tattoos?" Zoe felt her cheeks warm. "I noticed them when I was treating your cuts." Cole nodded, running a hand over the verses visible on his forearm. "They're my reminders, to stay on the right path, to remember mercy." He paused, then continued. "I used to lead the Iron Disciples MC. We weren't good people back then. Did things I'm not proud of." "What changed?" Zoe asked softly. "My mama died," he said, his voice growing quiet. "Cancer. Near the end, she made me promise to find a better way. She'd always believed there was good in me, even when I gave her every reason not to." He traced one of the verses on his arm. "These are her favorite scriptures. Each one marks a step away from who I was." Zoe found herself deeply moved by his honesty. And the motorcycle club? Still exists, but different now. We do charity rides, help at the youth center, try to keep kids from making the same mistakes we did. He met her eyes. Though some folks have trouble believing people can change. Around noon, Zoe realized she needed supplies, bandages, antiseptic, and some food suitable for someone recovering from injury. "I need to run into town," she told Cole. "Will you be all right for an hour?" "Don't worry about me," he assured her. "I've already imposed enough." The familiar routine of driving into Willow Creek felt somehow different today. As Zoe entered Marshall's pharmacy, she noticed the sudden hush, the way conversations dropped to whispers. Mrs. Marshall's usually warm smile seemed strained as she rang up Zoe's purchases. "Everything all right out at your place?" the older woman asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Just fine, thank you," Zoe replied politely, knowing word had already spread about her mysterious visitor. At the grocery store, she overheard snippets of conversation. That nurse harboring a biker should know better, asking for trouble. The whispers followed her down every aisle, reminding her of the murmurs that had haunted her after her marriage fell apart. She held her head high, selected what she needed, and checked out without acknowledging the sideways glances. The drive home gave her time to think. She'd spent so long being the subject of town gossip, first for her inability to have children, then for her husband's departure, that these new whispers shouldn't bother her. Yet they did, not for her sake, but for how quickly people jumped to judge Cole without knowing him. As she turned onto her driveway, she saw something that made her slow the truck to a stop. Cole was on her front porch, carefully sweeping away debris left by the storm. He moved gingerly, mindful of his injuries, but his methodical motion spoke of someone used to taking care of things. She gathered her bags and approached. "You shouldn't be up yet." He leaned on the broom, offering a small smile. "Needed to do something useful. Been lying around too long already." "Those stitches need time to heal," she chided gently. "Zoe," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "You saved more than my life last night." He gestured to the porch, the house, her kindness. "You showed mercy when you didn't have to, when most wouldn't have. That means something to a man like me." The simple sincerity in his words touched something deep in Zoe's heart. Here was someone else who understood what it meant to live under the weight of others' judgments, who knew the value of unexpected kindness. They stood together on the porch, the afternoon sun warm on their faces, while birds sang in the trees and the last puddles from the storm slowly dried in the yard. Neither spoke for a moment, but in the silence, something shifted. A quiet understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits finding refuge in an unlikely place. The late summer sun beat down on Zoe's yard as she watched Cole through her kitchen window. Despite her protests about his injuries, he'd insisted on helping around her property. His stitches were healing well, but she still worried as she observed him methodically repairing her broken fence posts. "The least I can do," he'd said that morning, his voice brooking no argument. "Can't sit idle while there's work needs doing." Now he moved with careful precision, his tattooed arms flexing as he hammered new boards into place. The fence had been broken for months, ever since a spring storm had torn through Willow Creek. Zoe had meant to hire someone to fix it, but somehow never got around to it. She brought him a glass of sweet tea, condensation beating on the outside. "You really don't have to do this." Cole paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "I want to." He took the glass, his fingers brushing hers. "Besides, your woodpile's looking low. Winter's coming." "Cole, let me do this, Zoe." His blue eyes held hers. "Please." Throughout the afternoon, the steady rhythm of his axe echoed across her property as he split logs for her winter firewood. Several, Cars drove by slowly, their occupants clearly interested in the sight of the tattooed biker working in Zoe's yard. She could almost hear the gossip spreading through town like a summer wildfire. Mrs. Peterson from next door walked past 3 times with her little dog, each time staring openly. By evening, Zoe's phone had several missed calls from church members she usually only heard from at Christmas. Sunday arrived warm and clear. The annual church picnic was always a major event in Willow Creek, with tables groaning under the weight of covered dishes and sweet tea flowing freely. Zoe hadn't planned to attend, but she knew staying away would only fuel the rumors. She wore her best floral dress and brought her famous peach cobbler, hoping familiar routines might ease the tension. But as she approached the church grounds, conversations stuttered to a halt. Women who'd known her for years suddenly found their paper plates fascinating. "Zoe." Pastor Richards nodded politely, though his wife barely acknowledged her presence. She found a quiet spot under an oak tree, picking at her food while trying to ignore the whispers. Her cobbler sat untouched on the dessert table. Then a murmur rippled through the crowd. Zoe looked up to see Cole walking across the church lawn. He'd cleaned up, wearing pressed jeans and a crisp white button-down shirt that covered most of his tattoos. In his hands, he carried a bouquet of wildflowers. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as he approached her. His boots were polished, his hair neatly combed. But it was the earnest expression on his face that made her heart skip. "These are for you," he said quietly, holding out the flowers. "To thank you for your kindness." Before Zoe could respond, Mrs. Richards's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Well, I never. Seems some women are desperate enough to take in any heathen that comes along." The words hung in the humid air. Zoe felt her face burn, shame and anger warring in her chest. But before she could speak, Cole turned to face the crowd. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the church lawn, "I may be many things, but I'm no heathen. These verses on my skin aren't for show. They're reminders of God's grace." He paused, looking around at the judgmental faces. "And if no man here's man enough to marry a woman like her, I will." The gasps were audible. Plates clattered. Someone dropped a glass of tea. Zoe stood frozen, her heart thundering in her chest. Cole's words echoed in her ears, impossible and wild, and somehow more real than anything she'd felt in years. The flowers trembled slightly in her hands. Pastor Richards cleared his throat. "Now, brother." "No," Cole interrupted firmly. "I've watched how this town treats her. A woman who spends her days caring for the sick, who took in a stranger because it was right, who shows more Christian charity than folks who sit in these pews every Sunday." His voice softened as he turned back to Zoe. "She deserves better." The silence that followed was deafening. Zoe couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The weight of every eye in Willow Creek pressed down on her, but it was Cole's steady gaze that held her in place. Finally, Mrs. Peterson's shrill voice broke the spell. "Well, I never!" The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Zoe managed to mumble something about needing to leave, gathered her empty dish, and fled to her truck. She drove home in a daze, Cole's words playing over and over in her mind. That night, she sat on her porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. The flowers Cole had given her sat in a mason jar on the little table beside her, their wild beauty somehow perfectly at home on her weathered porch. Hope. That's what this feeling was, she realized. Sharp and sweet and terrifying. She'd buried it so deep after losing the baby, after David left, that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. But here it was again, sprouting like a stubborn seedling through concrete. The crickets sang their evening chorus as Zoe gently pushed the swing back and forth. She touched one of the wildflowers, its petals soft against her fingertips. For the first time in years, she let herself imagine a different kind of future. One where whispers didn't matter, where broken things could be mended, where love might bloom in the most unexpected places. Her heart felt full to bursting with emotions she couldn't name. Fear was there, yes, but underneath it was something stronger, something that felt like the first warm day after a long winter, like the moment when you realize a wound has finally begun to heal. She sat there long into the night, letting the gentle creak of the porch swing keep time with her thoughts, while the stars wheeled overhead and the echo of Cole's words continued to stir something in her soul that she'd thought was lost forever. The Willow Creek Gazette lay folded on Zoe's kitchen table the next morning, its gossip column practically screaming off the page. "Reformed biker makes shocking proposal at church picnic." She pushed it aside, her hands shaking as she poured her morning coffee. Mrs. Henderson's sharp voice echoed in her mind from yesterday's events. "Did you see it in the paper? That Maddox fellow actually proposed to our Zoe right there at the church picnic. What is this town coming to?" The morning sun filtered through her kitchen window, casting warm squares of light across her worn tablecloth. Zoe traced one with her finger, trying to gather strength for the day ahead. She had a full schedule at the clinic, and she just knew what she would face. She wasn't wrong. The moment she walked into work, the atmosphere shifted. Nancy at reception suddenly needed to organize files. Dr. Thompson, who usually chatted with her about patients, barely nodded before disappearing into his office. Her first patient, elderly Mr. Jenkins, peered at her over his reading glasses. "Say, nurse, isn't that your name in the paper today?" "Let's focus on your blood pressure, Mr. Jenkins," she said softly, wrapping the cuff around his arm. Throughout the morning, the whispers followed her down the hallways. Some patients watched her with obvious curiosity, while others avoided eye contact altogether. Even Pastor Harris, who'd come in for his weekly blood pressure check, seemed uncomfortable. "Zoe," he began, his voice hesitant as she recorded his numbers. "The congregation is concerned." She kept her eyes on his chart. "My blood pressure readings show improvement, Pastor. The new medication seems to be working well." He cleared his throat. "That's not what I meant. This situation with Mr. Maddox. Would you like me to schedule your next appointment for the same time next week?" Her voice remained professional, though her hands trembled slightly. The pastor sighed, his weathered face creased with worry. "Just be careful, child. We don't know much about his kind." The afternoon brought no relief from the scrutiny, but it did bring Cole. He arrived in his truck, parking beside her car in the clinic lot during her lunch break. From her window, she watched him unload grocery bags. When she met him at the back door, he smiled that gentle smile that seemed so at odds with his rough exterior. "Thought you might need some supplies," he said, holding up the bags. "And maybe some company?" Inside her office, he unpacked sandwiches, fresh fruit, and her favorite iced tea. They sat together, the small space filled with the rustle of paper bags and the quiet sounds of their meal. "You don't have to keep coming around," she said finally. "The talk will die down eventually if I disappear?" He shook his head. "That's not happening, Zoe." After lunch, he insisted on fixing the squeaky hinge on her office door. The maintenance requests she'd filed months ago had gone nowhere, but Cole had it sorted in minutes. Through her afternoon appointments, she could hear him in the hallway, taking care of other small repairs she'd mentioned in passing. That evening, he followed her home in his truck. She'd given up protesting his evening visits. He always found some project that needed attention. Tonight, it was her kitchen sink. As they sat down to a simple dinner of soup and bread, Cole bowed his head. "Lord, thank you for this food and for bringing me to Zoe's door that night. Amen." The simple prayer touched something deep in her heart. They ate in comfortable silence until Cole set down his spoon. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly, "about my past." Zoe folded her hands in her lap, waiting. 5 years ago, I was engaged. His voice was rough with memory. Maria was pregnant with our child. We were going to leave the gang life behind, start fresh. He stared down at his tattooed hands. There was a raid. Police got a tip about our operations. It went bad. So bad. Maria was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She and our unborn baby. His voice broke. Zoe reached across the table, taking his hand. His fingers were calloused but gentle as they closed around hers. "The guilt nearly killed me," he continued. "I carried it like armor, letting it keep everyone away. Started getting these tattoos, scripture verses, trying to find some kind of redemption. But all I found was more shame." Tears slid down Zoe's cheeks as she listened. Here was a man who understood loss, who knew what it was to have dreams shatter and hope die. She saw past the tattoos, past the leather and chrome, to the wounded soul beneath. "That's why I can't walk away from you, Zoe," he said softly. "You looked at me that night and saw a person worth saving. Not my past, not my mistakes. Just me." The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the silence that followed. Outside, crickets began their evening chorus. Cole's hand was warm in hers, anchoring her in this moment that felt both terrifying and right. Later that night, after Cole had gone home, Zoe knelt beside her bed. The moonlight streamed through her window, painting silver patterns on her quilt. "Lord," she whispered, her hands clasped tight, "if this is scandal, let it be one of your grace. Let them whisper if they must, but please." Her voice caught. "Please let this be your doing. Let this be your kind of redemption story." She thought of Cole's prayers over their meals, of his gentle hands fixing broken things, of the way he looked at her like she was whole and worthy and wonderful. Maybe this was what grace looked like, not pristine and proper, but scarred and beautiful and unexpected. The moon sailed higher as Zoe prayed, not just for herself, but for Cole too. She prayed for healing for his wounded heart, for peace to replace his guilt, for the courage to face whatever tomorrow might bring. And somewhere in those prayers, hope began to bloom again, like flowers pushing through concrete, determined to reach the light. The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear, painting Willow Creek in shades of gold and amber. Zoe stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug warming her hands, watching leaves dance across her freshly swept porch. The past week had settled into a gentle rhythm, Cole stopping by with breakfast before work, helping around the house in the evenings, their quiet conversations stretching long into the night. The sound of tires on gravel broke her reverie. A sleek black Mercedes pulled into her driveway, its polished surface reflecting the morning sun. Zoe's heart stumbled as she recognized the car. Marcus. She set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. Through the window, she watched her ex-husband emerge from his car, straightening his designer suit with practiced precision. 7 years had added touches of gray to his temples, but his posture still carried that same air of superiority that had always made her feel small. The knock came. 3 sharp raps that echoed through her quiet house. Zoe smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and opened the door. "Marcus," she said softly, proud that her voice remained steady. "Zoe." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're looking, well." She stepped back, allowing him inside. His expensive cologne filled the space, foreign and intrusive in her simple home. He glanced around, taking in the fresh paint on the walls, the new curtains Cole had helped her hang. "I've been hearing things," Marcus said, settling uninvited into her favorite armchair. Disturbing things about you and some biker. Zoe's spine stiffened. Cole. His name is Cole. Ah, yes, the infamous Cole Maddox. Marcus's lip curled slightly. You do realize what this looks like? My name is still connected to yours in this town, Zoe. People remember we were married. We're being the operative word, she replied, her quiet dignity a shield against his condescension. Marcus leaned forward, his voice taking on that pastoral tone he'd often used when trying to correct her. I came here out of concern, to offer forgiveness for this unfortunate situation. Forgiveness? The word tasted bitter on her tongue. Yes, we all make mistakes, especially when we're desperate. He paused, letting the word hang between them. But it's not too late to make this right. Send him away, Zoe, before you completely ruin what's left of your reputation, of our reputations. The sound of boots on the porch made them both turn. Cole stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. He'd clearly been working on his bike. There was grease on his hands, and his white t-shirt bore smudges of oil. But his eyes were clear and steady as they took in the scene. Marcus stood, drawing himself up to his full height, though he still had to look up at Cole. This is a private conversation. Not in her house it isn't, Cole said quietly, moving to stand beside Zoe. His presence was solid, grounding. You have no right, Marcus began. No, Cole cut in, his voice low but firm. You're the one who lost that right. You walked out on gold and thought you left dust. Zoe's breath caught at his words. Marcus's face flushed dark with anger. How dare you? Marcus sputtered. Do you know who I am in this community? What I can do? I know exactly who you are, Cole replied evenly. A man who couldn't recognize a blessing when God put it right in front of him. Marcus's composure cracked. You'll regret this. Both of you. He jabbed a finger in their direction. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of woman takes up with an ex-con and what kind of man preys on vulnerable women. He stormed out, the door slamming behind him. The sound of his car peeling out of the driveway broke the tense silence. Zoe's legs felt weak. She sank onto the couch, Cole settling beside her. Outside, a cardinal landed on the bird feeder he'd fixed last week, its bright red feathers a splash of color against the autumn landscape. I'm sorry, she whispered. He shouldn't have. Don't apologize for him, Cole said gently. Not ever. They sat in silence as the afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the floor. Cole built a fire in the hearth, something he'd done every evening since discovering her house got chilly as night fell. The familiar routine soothed her nerves. The flames cast a warm glow across his face as he sat back down, highlighting the scripture verses that curved around his bicep. Zoe could make out the words from Psalm 23 etched in elegant script. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Zoe? His voice was barely above a whisper. Yes? You think? He paused, vulnerability raw in his expression. You think God could love a man like me? The question hung in the fire-lit air between them, heavy with the weight of past sins and present hopes. Zoe looked into his eyes, seeing past the tough exterior to the seeking soul beneath. He already does, she said softly, her heart full of certainty. Cole's breath caught, and she watched as her words washed over him like a benediction. A single tear tracked down his cheek, catching the firelight. Without thinking, she reached up and brushed it away, her fingers gentle against his skin. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney like prayers. Outside, the last light of day painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, but inside, In the warm circle of firelight, two broken people sat together, finding healing in each other's presence. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 7, its deep chimes filling the quiet room. Cole took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. They sat there, watching the flames dance, letting the peace of the moment wash away the bitter taste of Marcus's threats. In that sacred space between daylight and darkness, Zoe felt something shift inside her, like a key turning in a long-locked door. Here was a man who saw her worth, who defended her honor, who questioned his own worthiness even as he proved it with every gentle word and deed. The fire burned low, casting soft shadows on the walls. Neither spoke, but in the silence, their hearts beat out a quiet rhythm of hope, of healing, of possibility. And in that moment, Zoe understood that sometimes love comes not in grand gestures or perfect packages, but in oil-stained hands that fix broken things, in quiet prayers over simple meals, in the courage to face down the past and choose a different future. The morning sun painted Zoe's garden in soft golden light as she knelt in the rich soil, her hands working methodically among the vegetables. Cole worked beside her, his strong fingers gently supporting tomato vines as he secured them to wooden stakes. The quiet between them felt comfortable, like a well-worn quilt. "These tomatoes are coming in nicely," Cole observed, his voice carrying that gentle roughness that made her heart skip. He'd shed his leather jacket in the warmth, and his tattooed arms flexed as he worked. "They need tender care," Zoe replied, smiling as she watched him handle the delicate plants with surprising gentleness. "Just like people do." The days had fallen into a peaceful rhythm since Marcus's angry departure. Each morning, Cole would arrive just as the dew was lifting, bringing coffee and sometimes fresh pastries from the bakery in town. They'd work side by side in comfortable silence or easy conversation, tending to the garden that was slowly transforming under their shared care. In the afternoons, Zoe would make her rounds to check on her home care patients, and Cole had begun accompanying her. At first it raised eyebrows, the tattooed biker following the quiet nurse into homes. But something changed when people saw him in action. Like yesterday, when they visited old Mrs. Henderson. While Zoe checked vitals and changed dressings, Cole fixed the squeaky front door that had been bothering the elderly woman for months. He worked quietly, efficiently, and refused any payment beyond a glass of sweet tea. Today, they were heading into town after finishing in the garden. Zoe watched as Cole wiped his hands on a rag, leaving traces of soil on his worn jeans. He caught her looking and gave her that small, crooked smile that made her chest tight. "Ready for rounds?" he asked, extending a hand to help her up. The touch of his calloused palm against hers sent warmth spreading through her fingers. "Just let me clean up a bit," she said, trying to hide the slight tremor in her voice. They drove into town in Cole's truck, the radio playing soft gospel music. As they passed the park, they spotted a small crowd of children gathered around something, their voices raised in distress. "Hold up," Cole said, pulling over. "Something's wrong." They found Tommy Wilson, 10 years old, crying over his mangled bicycle. The front wheel was bent almost double, the chain hanging loose. "What happened, sugar?" Zoe asked, kneeling beside the boy. "Hit a pothole," Tommy sniffled. "Dad's gonna kill me. He just bought it last month." Cole studied the damage, then knelt down next to Tommy. "Hey, buddy, I think we can fix this. You want to learn how?" The boy's tear-stained face lit up. "Really?" For the next hour, Cole sat on the grass with Tommy and the other children who'd gathered around. He showed them how to straighten the wheel, fix the chain, and adjust the brakes. His hands moved with practiced ease as he explained each step in simple terms the children could understand. Zoe watched from a nearby bench, her heart swelling as she saw how naturally he connected with the kids. They weren't afraid of his tattoos or his rough appearance. They just saw someone who cared enough to help. Parents walking by cast suspicious glances their way, some hurrying to collect their children. But the kids stayed, fascinated by Cole's mechanical knowledge and gentle teaching style. "There you go," Cole said finally, helping Tommy back onto the restored bike. "Give it a try." The boy pedaled in a circle, his face split by a huge grin. "It's perfect. Thank you, Mr. Cole." As they drove away, Zoe noticed Cole's small smile. "You're good with children," she said softly. He was quiet for a moment. "They don't judge," he replied. "They just see what's real." The afternoon passed quickly as they visited patients. At Mrs. Martinez's house, Cole fixed a leaky faucet while Zoe helped with medication. At the Johnsons', he carried in groceries for the elderly couple, while Zoe checked Mr. Johnson's blood pressure. Evening found them back at Zoe's house, where Cole insisted on cooking dinner. "It's not much," he said apologetically, stirring a pot of homemade soup. "But my mama taught me a few things before she passed." Zoe set the table with her best tablecloth and candles, trying not to think about how domestic it all felt. How right. Thunder rumbled in the distance as they sat down to eat, and soon rain was pattering against the windows. The candlelight cast soft shadows across Cole's face as they talked and laughed over bowls of surprisingly delicious soup. He told her stories about his childhood, about learning to ride motorcycles with his father, about the day he decided to change his life. "I was sitting in a jail cell," he said quietly, "reading the Bible my mama had sent me. And suddenly, I understood what she'd been trying to tell me all those years about grace." Zoe found herself leaning forward, drawn in by the raw honesty in his voice. The candle flames flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Grace finds us in the darkest places," she said softly. Cole reached across the table then, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm, steady, sure. This time Zoe didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her palm up, letting their fingers intertwine. The moment stretched between them, tender and new, like a fresh spring leaf unfurling. The rain continued its gentle symphony outside, creating a cocoon of peace around them. What neither of them saw was the dark sedan parked across the street, or Marcus sitting behind the wheel, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as he watched through the rain-streaked windshield. His face was twisted with bitterness as he observed their candle-lit dinner, their joined hands, their soft laughter carrying faintly through the windows. Inside, Zoe and Cole remained lost in their own world, unaware of the watching eyes. The candles burned lower, casting a warm glow over their joined hands and the empty soup bowls between them. For the first time in years, Zoe felt her heart opening like a flower turning toward the sun, embracing the possibility of love she'd thought was forever lost to her. The rain continued to fall, a gentle curtain separating their moment of grace from the darkness that watched from beyond the windows. Sunday morning dawned clear and crisp, with dew sparkling on the grass like scattered diamonds. Zoe stood before her mirror, smoothing her best, floral dress with trembling hands. Her heart fluttered like a caged bird as she pinned her hair just so, wondering if she was making the right choice by bringing Cole to church. The drive to First Baptist was quiet, filled with unspoken tension. Cole sat beside her in pressed jeans and a clean white button-down shirt, his tattoos barely visible at his collar. His large hands fidgeted with a worn Bible in his lap. His mother's, she knew. "You don't have to do this," Zoe said softly, as they pulled into the parking lot. Cole's blue eyes met hers steadily. "Yes, I do." The moment they stepped through the heavy wooden doors, all conversation ceased. The usual pre-service chatter died away as heads turned, eyes widening at the sight of Cole Maddox, former gang leader, walking into their sanctuary. Zoe heard the sharp intake of breath from Mrs. Peterson, saw the way Deacon Williams stepped protectively closer to his wife. They found seats in the back row, but there was no hiding. Zoe could feel the weight of stares, the silent judgment pressing in from all sides. She kept her chin up, though her hands trembled slightly as she opened her hymnal. The service began as always, with familiar hymns and prayers. Zoe noticed Cole singing quietly beside her, his deep voice carrying the old hymns with surprising grace. When they sat, his hand found hers, warm and steady. Pastor Johnson's sermon was about redemption, about Paul's conversion on the Damascus Road. Zoe wondered if he'd chosen the topic knowing Cole would be there. As the sermon drew to a close, the pastor asked, as he did every week, if anyone had a testimony to share. The silence stretched long and heavy. Then Cole stood. Zoe's heart nearly stopped as he walked to the front, his steps measured and deliberate. He turned to face the congregation, and in the morning light streaming through the stained glass windows, she could see every line of tension in his face. "My name is Cole Maddox," he began, his voice steady but humble. "Most of you know who I am, or who I was. For 15 years, I led the Iron Disciples. I've done things that have haunted me every day since. The silence in the church was absolute. Even the babies weren't crying. 10 years ago, I lost my fiancé and unborn child because of the life I was living. The police raided our compound, and in the chaos, his voice caught. She was trying to reach me. She fell, and I couldn't save them." Tears gleamed in his eyes, but he continued. "I carried that guilt like a stone around my neck. Thought God could never forgive me. But then my mama got sick, and in her last days, she made me promise to read her Bible. She said, 'Cole, baby, grace is bigger than your guilt.'" He touched one of his tattoos absently. "I started marking myself with scripture, not to show off my faith, but to remind myself of God's promises when I couldn't believe in them. Started trying to live different. But I still felt lost, still felt unredeemable." His eyes found Zoe's. "Until this woman found me broken on the side of the road. She didn't see my past, my tattoos, my reputation. She just saw someone who needed help. Through her actions, she taught me what mercy really looks like, what God's love looks like in human form." Tears were flowing freely now, not just from Cole, but from many in the congregation. Mrs. Peterson was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Then Cole did something that made Zoe's heart stop. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a delicate silver cross on a chain. "This was my mama's," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She wore it every day of her life." He walked back to where Zoe sat, then went down on one knee before her. Gasps echoed through the sanctuary. "Zoe Ellison," he said, holding out the necklace, "you showed me that God's love can heal what shame and guilt broke. You helped me believe in grace again. Would you do me the honor of being my wife?" Zoe couldn't speak for a moment, overwhelmed by the love shining in his eyes. Then, through her tears, she whispered, "Yes." The congregation burst into applause as Cole slipped the necklace around her neck. Someone started singing Amazing Grace, and soon the whole church had joined in, their voices rising to the rafters in celebration of love and redemption. That evening, they celebrated quietly at Zoe's house. Cole made his mama's soup recipe again, and they sat at the kitchen table sharing stories and dreams. Their laughter filled the small house with joy, and Zoe couldn't stop touching the silver cross that now rested against her heart. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again," she admitted, watching the moonlight play across Cole's face. He reached across the table to take her hand. "God's got a way of surprising us." It was nearly 11 o'clock when Zoe finally headed upstairs to bed, her heart full to bursting. She was just changing into her nightgown when she saw the flash of red and blue lights through her bedroom window. Her stomach dropped as she hurried downstairs. Cole was already at the door, where Sheriff Dean Harris stood with a grim expression. "Cole Maddox," the sheriff said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "I have a warrant for your arrest." "What?" Zoe pushed forward. "What charges?" "A 10-year-old gang-related charge," Sheriff Harris explained, not meeting their eyes. "From before the Iron Disciples reformed. I'm sorry, but I have to take him in." Cole's face had gone pale, but he remained calm. "It's all right, Zoe," he said softly, already holding out his wrists for the handcuffs. "We'll figure this out." "No," Zoe protested, grabbing his arm. "This isn't right. Not today. Not after everything." "Ma'am," Sheriff Harris said gently, "please step back. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The handcuffs clicked shut around Cole's wrists, the sound echoing in Zoe's ears like a gunshot. She watched helplessly as they led him to the patrol car, his shoulders straight and head held high despite the circumstances. Just before they put him in the car, Cole turned back to look at her. "Keep the faith, Angel," he called out. "God's got a plan even for this." Zoe stood on her porch, clutching her mama's cross, as the patrol car's taillights disappeared into the night. The soup bowls still sat on the table inside, half finished, a testament to how quickly joy could turn to sorrow. But even in her fear and confusion, she felt the weight of the cross against her chest and remembered Cole's words from earlier that day. Grace is bigger than guilt. Whatever was coming, they would face it together, with faith as their shield and love as their strength. The patrol car's taillights disappeared into the darkness, taking Cole away. Zoe stood frozen on her porch, her fingers pressed against her lips to hold back her sobs. The crickets chirped, oblivious to how her world had just shattered. Finally, when the night air turned cold enough to make her shiver, she went inside. Her house felt emptier than it had in weeks. The half-finished bowls of soup still sat on the kitchen table, steam no longer rising from them. When she went to clear them away, her hand trembled so badly she nearly dropped them. Morning came too quickly. Zoe had barely slept when her phone started ringing. First, it was Margaret from the church council, calling to express concern. Then Sarah from the hospital scheduling office, informing her that 3 patients had requested different nurses. By noon, her entire week's schedule had been gutted. "We just want to be careful," Sarah said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You understand, don't you?" At the grocery store, whispers followed her down every aisle. "She loved a criminal," she heard Mrs. Peterson tell the checkout girl. "Always knew there was something wrong with her." Sunday was worst of all. Zoe walked into church, head held high despite her red-rimmed eyes. Her usual pew, 3rd row from the front, right side, sat empty. But when she moved to sit down, the family in front suddenly gathered their things and moved across the aisle. The message was clear. She was contaminated by association. Back home, Zoe stood in her kitchen, feeling more alone than she had in years. That's when she spotted it, the silver cross necklace lying on her counter. Cole must have left it there before the sheriff came. She picked it up with trembling fingers, remembering how it had felt when he'd placed it around her neck just hours before his arrest. Days blurred together. Zoe took extra shifts at the hospital, working with patients too sick to care about gossip. But even there, she felt the sideways glances, heard the whispers that followed her down the halls. 2 weeks after Cole's arrest, she finally got approval to visit him at the county jail. Her heels clicked against the concrete floor as a guard led her to the visitation area. The sound echoed off the stark walls, making her feel small. Cole sat on the other side of the thick glass partition, wearing an orange jumpsuit that couldn't dim the light in his eyes. When he saw her, his face lit up with that gentle smile she'd grown to love. They both reached for the phones at the same time. "You came," he said softly. "Of course I came." Zoe pressed her hand against the glass. "I know you're innocent of whatever they're saying." Cole's eyes grew sad. "The charge is real enough. 10 years ago, before I changed. A robbery gone wrong. Nobody got hurt, but that's not who you are anymore," Zoe insisted. "No," he agreed. "It's not." He leaned forward, his voice growing stronger. "You know what's funny? I've been thinking maybe God needed me still long enough to finish what I started." "What do you mean?" Cole's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Remember how I told you about leading Bible study with my old gang? Well, I've started something similar here. We've got a prayer circle going, 15 men strong already." Despite everything, Zoe felt a smile tugging at her lips. Even here, locked away, Cole was still finding ways to spread light. "These men," he continued, "they're like I was, lost, angry. But when we pray together..." He shook his head in wonder. "Something changes. They're starting to see hope." Zoe watched him through the glass, marveling at his peace. The man before her wasn't bitter or defeated. If anything, he seemed more certain of his path than ever. "I found your mother's cross," she said softly. "I've been keeping it safe." "Keep wearing it," he told her. "It looks better on you anyway." When the guard called time, Zoe didn't want to leave, but Cole assured her he was okay. "God's got a plan," he reminded her. "And whatever it is, we're facing it together." She walked out of the jail that day with her head held higher. Let them gossip, she thought. Let them judge. True love, the kind that God blessed, could withstand any storm. And as she drove home, she found herself humming the old hymn they'd sung at church the day Cole proposed. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me." The autumn leaves turned and fell, and still Cole remained behind bars. 3 months had passed since his arrest, each day bringing fresh judgment to Zoe's doorstep. But she kept her head high, focusing on her work at the hospital where even suspicious glances couldn't stop her from tending to those in need. Every evening, after her shift, Zoe would sit at her kitchen table and write to Cole. Her letters weren't fancy, just simple stories about the changing seasons, how his garden was doing, and the way her faith sustained her through lonely nights. "The tomatoes you planted are finally ripening," she wrote one evening. "I think of you every time I water them." When sleep proved elusive, she'd open her Bible, reading familiar verses aloud. Sometimes she'd read Cole's favorite passages, imagining him doing the same in his cell. The words filled her empty house with comfort. Then something unexpected happened. Maria Santos, a reporter from the local paper, caught wind of Zoe's daily letters. At first, Zoe hesitated to share her story, but Maria saw something beautiful in her unwavering devotion. The article appeared on a Sunday morning. "The Nurse Who Loves an Angel in Chains." Maria's words painted a touching portrait of faithfulness in the face of adversity. Within days, the story went viral online, touching hearts across the country. Letters began arriving from everywhere: Montana, Florida, even Alaska. "Your love story gives me hope," wrote a woman from Oregon. "Don't give up," urged another from Texas. One morning, sorting through the mail, Zoe found herself doing something she hadn't done in months. She smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. These strangers' words reminded her that love, true love, blessed by God, could touch hearts far beyond Willow Creek's narrow boundaries. The morning sun had barely risen when Zoe's phone rang, shattering the quiet of her kitchen. Her hands trembled as she answered. The voice on the other end belonged to Cole's lawyer. "They're releasing him today. His old motorcycle club members came forward with evidence. They testified that Cole had actually tried to prevent that tragic raid years ago." Zoe's knees went weak. She steadied herself against the counter, tears already forming. Within an hour, she joined the growing crowd outside the courthouse. The whole town seemed to have shown up, some curious, others appearing shamefaced about their previous judgments. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, Cole stepped through the heavy wooden doors. He wore clean clothes, crisp jeans and a white button-down shirt that made his tattoos peek out like glimpses of his past. In his arms, he carried a cardboard box filled with stuffed animals and toy cars. A reporter thrust a microphone toward him. "What are the toys for?" Cole's voice was steady, full of purpose. "These are for the foster kids at St. Mary's Home. If Zoe and I can't have children of our own, we'll make sure we love every child who needs us." Zoe couldn't wait any longer. She pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. Cole set down the box just in time to catch her in his arms. Their embrace spoke of months of separation, of faith tested and proven true. The crowd, perhaps moved by this display of pure love, broke into spontaneous applause. As the afternoon sun began its descent, they drove home in Cole's old pickup truck. The setting sun painted the sky in sheets of gold, turning everything it touched into something precious and new. The late summer breeze rustled through the ancient oak tree's leaves, its branches draped with white ribbons that danced in the golden afternoon light. The whole town of Willow Creek had gathered, filling the wooden benches that dotted the church lawn. Zoe stood at the beginning of the flower-strewn path, her white dress, simple yet elegant. Her heart swelled as she looked at the line of children from Hope Center Foster Home, each one holding a bright wildflower. These were the children she and Cole had spent every weekend with, reading stories and mending broken toys. At the oak tree, Cole waited, his white shirt crisp against his denim vest. His mother's cross necklace caught the sunlight, a symbol of their shared journey. His eyes never left Zoe as she walked toward him, each step bringing them closer to their new beginning. Preacher Thompson's smile was genuine as he faced the couple. Their vows rang out clear and true, speaking of forgiveness found and grace given. When Cole spoke of second chances, several people dabbed at their eyes. Even Mrs. Peterson, who had once led the whisper campaign against them, wiped away tears. As evening settled over the gathering, children's laughter filled the yard. Zoe watched them play, her heart full. She turned to Cole, her voice soft with wonder. "I guess God knew I'd be a mother after all." They held each other close as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Through the church's open window, the soft notes of Amazing Grace drifted out, wrapping around them like a blessing, marking the end of their journey from judgment to joy. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.